Hello, this is Ken Kuminski, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the March 19th, 2026 issue of the New York Times of the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The first article from the front page: strikes deliver another blow to Iran's domestic energy sites. The attacks could worsen the severe electricity shortages that Iranians already face. By Abdi Latif Dahir, Christina Goldbaum, and Michael Levinson. Iran's domestic energy sector came under heavy attack on Wednesday after airstrikes hit critical infrastructure used to generate electricity for its industries and homes, just hours after Israel killed Iran's intelligence minister in another blow to the battered regime in Tehran. Iran said that airstrikes had damaged a number of facilities connected to the South Pars gas field, a vast natural gas reservoir in the Persian Gulf, and had also hit oil and petrochemical facilities in the southern city of Asuleya, where gas from the South Pars field is pumped for processing. Although it was not clear how much damage had been done, the strikes could worsen Iran's already severe domestic energy shortages. Iran and Qatar, which owns part of the gas field, blamed Israel for the attacks. Israel did not immediately comment. After the strikes, oil and natural gas prices spiked, with the global benchmark for crude oil soaring to more than $109 a barrel, as investors worried that Iran would retaliate by striking oil and gas sites in the region, putting further pressure on crude supplies. Gasoline prices in the United States have been rising since the start of the war, reaching $3.84 a gallon on Wednesday. The Trump administration, in an effort to lower prices, said on Wednesday that it would temporarily relax a law that restricts the way oil is shipped within the United States. Relaxing the law known as the Jones Act could reduce the cost of transporting fuel and agricultural products by ship between American ports. But analysts and some shipping executives expect the move to only have a marginal impact on gas prices. Carolyn Levitt, the White House press secretary, said the 60-day waiver would allow vital resources like oil, natural gas, fertilizer, and coal to flow freely to U.S. ports. Most of the energy Iran takes from South Pars is used domestically, so any significant disruption would intensify the strain that the U.S. and Israeli bombing campaign is putting on Iran's economy and daily life in the country. Natural gas is used to generate electricity and for household heat, hot water, and cooking for most Iranians. A senior Irani oil ministry official, speaking on the condition of anonymity to discuss delicate issues, said initial reports indicated that the country's energy infrastructure had been seriously damaged and that significant amounts of gas had been taken off the grid. Qatar warned that targeting energy infrastructure was a dangerous and irresponsible step that could put global energy security at risk. Iran vowed to retaliate for the attack on the South Pars field. The Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps on Wednesday warned people in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, which hosts a sprawling U.S. military base, to stay away from major oil and gas facilities. Not long after, Qatar Energy, a state-owned oil and gas company, said that its Ras Laffan energy hub had sustained extensive damage from missile attacks. No one was injured, it said, and crews were working to put out fires. Qatar's foreign ministry called the strike a dangerous escalation and accused Iran of pushing the region toward the brink. Saudi Arabia said it had intercepted a drone approaching one of its gas plants, and loud explosions rocked the capital, Riyadh, as its air defenses shot down incoming missiles. It said there were no indications of damage or injuries. The attacks came as Israel continued to systematically target high-ranking Iranian officials with the killing of Esmail Khatib, the intelligence minister. The Israeli military said in a statement that Mr. Khatib's ministry had overseen surveillance, espionage, and the execution of covert operations worldwide, particularly against the State of Israel and Iranian citizens. His death came a day after Israeli airstrikes killed Ali Larijani, Iran's top national security official and its de facto political leader, and Brigadier General Gholamreza Soleimani, the commander of the Basij, a large Iranian paramilitary force used to enforce security and suppress dissent. We will continue chasing all of the regime's senior officials, Brigadier General Efi Defrin, an Israeli military spokesman, said in a news briefing on Wednesday. The series of assassinations will not stop. Israel has said its hopes its strikes on Iran's leaders will encourage Iranians to overthrow the government, a goal President Trump also expressed when he announced the start of the bombing campaign on February 28th. But at a Senate Intelligence Committee hearing in Washington on Wednesday, Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, said that although the Iranian leadership had been largely degraded by U.S. and Israeli attacks, the government still appears to be intact. In a statement on Wednesday, Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who succeeded his father Ayatollah Ali Khamenei after his death in an Israeli airstrike, expressed sorrow over the killing of Mr. Larijani. He said that such bloodshed would only strengthen the Islamic Republic and promised that those responsible would pay a price. Mr. Larijani's funeral in Tehran on Wednesday, huge crowds of people gathered waving Iranian flags, and the state news media showed Mr. Larijani's coffin surrounded by mourners who chanted, "Death to America," and "Death to Israel." Even as Israel has been pounding targets in Iran, its forces have also been intensifying attacks in Lebanon, raising fears of a full-scale invasion. On Wednesday, the Israeli military said that it had struck 2 bridges over the Litani River, a key boundary line in southern Lebanon, in the latest sign that Israel is widening its operations there. The Israeli military accused Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed militia, of using the bridges to move fighters and weapons into southern Lebanon, where Israeli forces have been expanding a ground invasion and ordering residents to evacuate. Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, said the strikes were aimed not only at disrupting Hezbollah's movements, but also at sending a clear message to the Lebanese government that Lebanese infrastructure cannot be used by Hezbollah. Earlier Wednesday, the Israeli military struck Beirut, the Lebanese capital, and other Lebanese cities, towns, and villages after Hezbollah fired a barrage of rockets, drones, and artillery shells into Israel overnight. Several Israeli strikes hit central Beirut, away from Hezbollah's stronghold in the southern outskirts of the city, fueling anxiety that areas of the capital once considered safe are in danger. Israel's strikes came at times without warning. An unannounced Israeli attack on the central Zukak al-Blat and Basta areas of Beirut early Wednesday killed at least 10 people and wounded 27 others, according to the Lebanese Ministry of Public Health. Another building in Zukak al-Blat was struck later without a warning, igniting a fire on its upper floors. More than 960 people have been killed in Lebanon and more than 2,400 others wounded in the nearly 3 weeks since fighting erupted between Israel and Hezbollah, according to Lebanon's health ministry. More than 110 children are among the dead, the ministry said. The Norwegian Refugee Council, a humanitarian organization, said on Wednesday that 1 million people had been displaced by the fighting in Lebanon, a sixth of the population. In Israel, the authorities said that a couple in suburban Tel Aviv was killed by an exploding cluster bomb from the warhead of an Iranian missile. Yaron and Ilana Moshe died in their apartment building in Ramat Gan. A local police chief said it seemed that they had not made it into their apartment's safe room as sirens warning of an incoming attack blared around the city. Iran had said it had launched a ballistic missile assault on Tel Aviv in retaliation for the killing of Mr. Larijani. Next, from Times Investigation, Cesar Chavez, a civil rights icon, is accused of abusing girls for years. An investigation by the New York Times found extensive evidence that the United Farm Workers co-founder groomed and sexually abused girls who worked in the movement. By Manny Fernandez and Sarah Hurtes. These reporters interviewed several women who told their stories for the first time, as well as more than 60 other people, including Cesar Chavez's top aides and relatives. The reporters also revealed hundreds of pages of union records, confidential emails, photographs, and other material. Ana Murguia remembers the day the man she had regarded as a hero called her house and summoned her to see him. She walked along a dirt trail, entered the rundown building, passed his secretary, and stepped into his office. He locked the door, as he always did when he called her, and told her how lonely he had been. He brought her onto the yoga mat that he often used in his office for meditation, kissed her, and pulled her pants down. "Don't tell anyone," he told her afterward. "They'd get jealous." The man, Cesar Chavez, one of the most revered figures in the Latino civil rights movement, was 45. She was 13. Ms. Magura said she was summoned for sexual encounters with him dozens of times over the next 4 years. Recently, more than 50 years later, Ms. Magura learned that a street near her home in the central California city of Bakersfield was in the process of being renamed. City officials want to name it in honor of her abuser, Cesar Chavez Boulevard. Ms. Magura and another woman, Deborah Rojas, say that Mr. Chavez sexually abused them for years when they were girls, from around 1972 to 1977. He was in his 40s and become a powerful, charismatic figure who captured global attention as a champion of farm worker rights. The two women have not shared their stories publicly before, and an investigation by the New York Times has uncovered extensive evidence to support their accusations and those raised by several other women against Mr. Chavez, the United Farm Workers co-founder who died in 1993 at the age of 66. The questions raised by the Times about Mr. Chavez, one of the most consequential figures in Mexican-American history, immediately prompted organizations with ties to him to try to distance themselves. The UFW canceled its annual celebrations honoring Mr. Chavez, a response to what the union he once led called profoundly shocking accusations. Marches to honor Mr. Chavez were called off in Austin, Texas, Tucson, Arizona, and elsewhere. Officials in multiple states said they would consider renaming the scores of streets and schools named in his honor. None of us knew, Governor Gavin Newsom of California said on Wednesday, noting that he planned to discuss with legislatures whether to rename Cesar Chavez Day on March 31st. Ms. Magura and Ms. Rojas, both of whom are now 66, were the daughters of longtime organizers who had marched in rallies alongside Mr. Chavez. He used the privacy of his California office to frequently molest Ms. Magura, she said. He had known her since she was 8 years old. She became so traumatized that she attempted to end her life multiple times by the age of 15. "I wanted to die," she said. Ms. Rojas said she was 12 when Mr. Chavez first touched her inappropriately, groping her breasts in the same office where he'd meet with Ms. Magura. When Ms. Rojas was 15, he arranged to have her stay at a motel during a weeks-long march through California, she said, and had sexual intercourse with her. Rape under state law, because she was not old enough to consent. Ms. Magura said Mr. Chavez molested her but never had intercourse with her. The abuse allegations appear to be part of a larger pattern of sexual misconduct by Mr. Chavez, much of which has never been publicly revealed. The Times investigation found that Mr. Chavez also used many of the women who worked and volunteered in his movement for his own sexual gratification. His most prominent female ally in the movement, Dolores Huerta, said in an interview that he sexually assaulted her, a disclosure she has never before made publicly. Many of the women stayed silent for decades, both out of shame and for fear of tarnishing the image of a man who has become the face of Latino civil rights movement, his image on school murals, and his birthday, a state holiday in California. The findings are based on interviews with more than 60 people, including his top aides at the time, his relatives, and former members of the UFW, which he founded with Ms. Huerta and Gilbert Padilla. The Times reviewed hundreds of pages of union records, confidential emails and photographs, as well as hours of audio recordings from UFW board meetings. The accounts of abuse from Ms. Magura and Ms. Rojas were independently verified through interviews with those they confided in decades ago and in more recent years. Elements of their stories were also corroborated in documents, emails, itineraries, and other writings from union organizers, supporters of Mr. Chavez, and historians. The Times spoke at length with Ms. Huerta, the renowned Latina activist who helped run the Farm Workers Union with Mr. Chavez, and coined the social justice rallying cry, "Sí, se puede," loosely translated as, "Yes, we can." She said she has held onto a dark secret for nearly 60 years. One night during the winter of 1966 in Delano, California, she said Mr. Chavez drove her out to a secluded grape field, parked, and raped her inside the vehicle. Ms. Huerta, who was 36 at the time, said she chose not to report the assault to the police because of their hostility toward the movement, and she feared that no one within the union would believe her. She also described an earlier encounter in August 1960 when she said she felt pressure to have sex with him in a hotel room during a work trip in San Juan Capistrano in Southern California. Ms. Huerta later began a long-term domestic partnership with Mr. Chavez's brother, Richard, with whom she had 4 children. He died in 2011. Ms. Huerta turns 96 on April 10th. Her memories of the details of the assault that night in Delano are at times hazy, but she speaks of the attack in a startlingly matter-of-fact manner. She described being stunned by Mr. Chavez's aggression and then numb to it. She framed her silence at the time not as an absence of pain, but as a kind of strategic necessity, particularly as a woman fighting for respect in the male-dominated world of 1960s union organizing. Now her accusation shatters what was a widely celebrated and seemingly egalitarian bond between two of the most influential Hispanic activists in U.S. history. Unfortunately, he used some of his great leadership to abuse women and children. It's really awful. More than 30 years after his death, Mr. Chavez has become only more revered in the Latino community. As President Trump's efforts to limit immigration and scale back rights to threaten to destroy many of the gains secured by decades of his work. Through a series of grueling fasts, grape boycotts, and marches that captured the world's imagination, Mr. Chavez drew a spotlight to the plight of the American farm worker. He not only improved wages, living conditions, and health care for generations of farm workers and their families, but also strengthened the political power of Latinos, giving their voice and concerns an urgency and moral authority on the national stage. He was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, in 1994, when Joseph R. Biden Jr. entered the White House in 2021. He put a bronze bust of Mr. Chavez on display in the Oval Office. The allegations of rape and sexual abuse are likely to have far-reaching consequences. On Tuesday, the United Farm Workers issued a statement saying that the organization would not take part in any activities celebrating Mr. Chavez's birthday on March 31st. The union said the troubling allegations that were surfacing were incompatible with the organization's values, adding that it did not have first-hand knowledge of any misconduct. We need some time to get this right, including to ensure robust, trauma-informed services are available to those who may need it, the union said in a statement. Mr. Chavez's family said on Tuesday night that they were not in a position to judge the claims. As a family steeped in the values of equity and justice, we honor the voices of those who feel unheard and who report sexual misconduct, they said in a statement. These allegations are deeply painful to our family. A handful of Mr. Chavez's relatives and former UFW leaders have been aware for years about various allegations of sexual misconduct, but there is no evidence that they made efforts to fully investigate the accusations, acknowledge the victims, or apologize to them. Instead, many of the women say they were discouraged from speaking out in order to preserve Mr. Chavez's public image. Internal emails dating back over a decade show union members discussing Ms. Magura's claims of abuse and the impact it had on her life. One of Ms. Magura's relatives confronted Mr. Chavez while he was still alive in the 1980s. According to the relative, Mr. Chavez offered no defense and responded only by clearing his throat. More than 10 years ago, members of a private Facebook group for longtime Chavez organizers and supporters were stunned to read a post from Ms. Rojas that she wrote in a fit of anger as they prepared to celebrate the holiday in his name. Her post read in part, "Wake up, people. This man you march for every year molested me." Ms. Rojas deleted the message days after posting it and was accused by some who saw it or heard about it of jeopardizing all that had been accomplished by not only Mr. Chavez, but her parents and those they marched alongside. Nothing has emerged publicly to back up the claims made by Ms. Huerta. Her description of assault could not be independently verified because she said she had told no one, not even her children or closest friends, until just a few weeks ago. But the paper trail of some of Mr. Chavez's misconduct involving young girls can be found in the very archives built to preserve his legacy. In one handwritten letter on girlish stationery, imprinted with roses, Ms. Rojas wrote to Mr. Chavez in January 1974 at the age of 13, shifting between childlike school updates and swooning devotion. She said she wrote the letter more than a year after he first kissed and fondled her in her office in 1972, when she was a 12-year-old seventh grader. "I'm really glad I got to see you and spend time with you. Well, not like that, but just to know I was near you was enough," she wrote, adding, "I think of you all the time. Do you think of me?" The letter is among thousands of documents and other materials in the Walter R. Reuther Library Archives at Wayne State University in Detroit. Looking back on it now, Ms. Rojas said she believed that Mr. Chavez wanted her to be a real part of his life. He would tell her that they would move together someday to Mexico. He told her to stay away from other boys because he'd get jealous. He told her that the Flamingos song, "I Only Have Eyes for You," was their song, and that every time she heard it, she should just remember that I love you. "I had love for him," Ms. Rojas said. "He did this grooming very well. He should get an Academy Award for all he did." Elements of Mr. Chavez's extramarital affairs with adult women were chronicled in at least two biographies: Matt Garcia's From the Jaws of Victory, The Triumph and Tragedy of Cesar Chavez, and the Farm Worker Movement, published in 2012, and Miriam Powell's The Crusades of Cesar Chavez, a biography published in 2014. But neither raised issues of abuse of underage girls. While Mr. Chavez had 8 children with his wife, Helen Chavez, the Times investigation showed that he also fathered at least 4 children with 3 other women. 2 of these children and other family members were interviewed and confirmed the relationship. Additionally, 23andMe match results were reviewed for the 4 children, and they confirmed Mr. Chavez's biological ties to each case. 2 of the children were the result of his 2 sexual encounters with Ms. Huerta, she told the Times, including the assault she described in 1966. Ms. Huerta said she concealed the pregnancies by wearing baggy clothes and ponchos, had the baby girls, and then arranged for them to be raised by others. The accusations involving Ms. Magura and Ms. Rojas date back to a period when they themselves were children, with behavior they now describe as grooming beginning when they were as young as 8 or 9. Ms. Rojas said she started seeing a therapist at the age of 16, 4 years after the abuse began, and continues to see one today. I picked up a drinking habit, she said, a panic attack habit, a bad relationship habit. Ms. Magura said she suffers from panic attacks and depression and has trouble being in public spaces or being part of crowds. I feel like it's been a shadow over my life, Ms. Rojas said. I want him to stop following me around. With some exceptions, most of the episodes the women described occurred over the decades in the same tight-knit place, La Paz, the Union's compound in the Tehachapi Mountains, more than 100 miles north of Los Angeles, where he kept his home and office. As a reminder, you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The time is now about 27 minutes past the hour. Sports fans, doctors, musicians, Africans lament U.S. travel ban. The restrictions on half the continent have been called racist and unfair. We don't come to the United States because we're running away, one NBA fan said. By Ruth McLean. Ruth McLean has lived and worked in dozens of African countries, reported from Senegal with help from reporters across the continent. For 3 years, Mohamed Fall saved up for a trip of a lifetime. In 2026, he planned to visit the United States from Senegal. A tech entrepreneur and sports fan, he wanted to see Stephen Curry play basketball, cheer on Senegal in the Soccer World Cup, and check out San Francisco. But then President Trump imposed harsh travel restrictions on Senegal, and Mr. Fall decided it would be pointless applying for a visa. There are 36 countries on Mr. Trump's travel ban or restrictions list. 29 of them are in Africa. The Department of Homeland Security said it was slamming the door shut on the foreign invaders who have undermined our national security. Many Americans see illegal immigration as a major problem in the United States, but under the Trump administration's policy, the people being shut out also include doctors, business people, students, musicians, and tourists seeking legal entry, like Mr. Fall. Homeland Security officials could not be reached for comment on the restrictions. Senegal won the Africa Cup of Nations in January and is a strong contender for the World Cup. But Mr. Fall has also been a fan of Mr. Curry's for 23 years. While in boarding school in the Senegalese countryside, he would walk 5 miles to the nearest screen just to see him play. Now he buys Golden State Warriors merchandise and league passes, and his wife teases him that he is really married to Mr. Curry. Like many African professionals who visit the United States, Mr. Fall is financially stable and passionate about creating jobs in his home country and travels internationally in Europe and Asia. He sees the U.S. policy as unfair and racist. We don't come to the United States because we're running away. We come to watch the games, he said. We come because America sold us the American way of life, NBA culture, basketball culture. These important things resonated with us and made us want to come, and then go home, not to stay in the United States and wander the streets in the cold. Not all are coming for tourism. Some of those who had planned trips were coming back to work. The rock band Étranne de l'Art from Agadez, a city on the edge of the Sahara in Niger, was set to do its fourth tour of the United States this summer with 55 shows. After Niger was placed on the banned list, they had to cancel. It's a big disappointment, said Abdoulaye Ibrahim, the bassist, who said the band members had lost 80% of their income this year. We're praying that it changes. Many come to further their educations, like Stanford Yat Sanza, a public policy researcher at the Zimbabwe Democracy Institute. He said he had hoped to do his PhD in the United States and had recently been searching for scholarships there. These latest developments have derailed my dream, he said. People on the restricted list, such as those in Zimbabwe and Senegal, can still apply for visas, but are facing an increase in rejections. Observers say, and in some cases, are required to post bonds of up to $15,000. People from nations on the banned list, such as Niger, can't come at all. In January, the Trump administration announced it would also suspend the approval of immigrant visas for people from 75 countries. Nearly 90% of African immigrant visa applicants are now banned, according to the Cato Institute, a think tank. The policies have been challenged in a flurry of ongoing lawsuits. The Trump administration has argued its immigration policies are necessary because it cannot sufficiently vet would-be travelers. It has also asserted that residents of certain affected countries have high overstay rates, though there are countries outside Africa with even higher overstay rates that have not been restricted. It appears to us that Africa is targeted, Cyril Ramaphosa, South Africa's president, said in a recent interview, adding that, in his opinion, a racist demeanor underlay the policy. We want to be treated with respect. Africans account for a small fraction of the immigrants in the United States, but they are much more likely than both U.S.-born and other foreign-born groups to be in the labor force, and more likely than other foreign-born people to have college educations, according to the Migration Policy Institute. Dozens of young Nigerian doctors come to the United States to do their residencies. We're sending highly trained, highly specialized people, and they're not just coming to leech off the American government or American society, said Dr. Susan Idanwe, president of the Nigerian Physicians Advocacy Group in the United States. They're offering care. They're taking care of communities. Lately, though, Dr. Idanwe's organization has been telling young Nigerian doctors that it's probably not the time to try to go to the United States. Nigeria could help Americans meet a need, she said. These are very, very knowledgeable people who can be used to improve health outcomes in some of our toughest communities. Nigeria is the country most affected by the restrictions, according to the American Immigration Council. By far Africa's most populous country, Nigeria's relations with the United States have recently been strained by Washington's false claims of a Christian genocide. The restrictions are a major concern for Nigeria's government, said Sunday Dare, a senior advisor to Nigeria's president, Bola Tinubu, and also for the thousands of Nigerians who regularly travel to the United States, including professionals and close relatives of American citizens. In recent years, around 128,000 immigrant and non-immigrant visas were issued to Nigerians annually. Painting everybody with one brush creates a lot of problems, Mr. Dare said. Joy Enichi, the owner of an Abuja-based travel agency, said the only Nigerians booking tickets to the United States now were diplomats, officials, and their children. She used to charge around $150 to help her clients apply for U.S. visas. But since the restrictions were announced, she has stopped offering that service, as the requirements are too onerous, she said. Instead, she said she now focuses on Europe, Asia, and other parts of Africa. This year, Ms. Enichi had planned a trip to the United States herself to visit a friend and find out more about the tours she sells to her clients. I've never been to the United States, but I've sold a lot of U.S. tickets, she said in a phone interview. but seeing all the visa denials, she has now decided to go to Britain instead. Not everyone sees the exclusion of the United States as a travel destination as a huge loss. Reverend Joseph John Hayab, the chairman of Northern Christian Association of Nigeria, emphasized that not all Nigerians were desperate visa seekers to America and that many were focused on staying and building their own country. If you travel outside, it's as if you've gone to heaven, he said. Traveling to America is not going to heaven. For Mr. Fall, the Senegalese tech entrepreneur, canceling his travel plans marks the end of a long-held dream. He thinks that Mr. Curry may be approaching retirement, he said, so this was probably his last chance to watch him live. And he is very worried about how Senegal's soccer team will perform in the World Cup, with almost nobody there to support them. The next article, an abandoned Russian tanker is drifting at sea. Will anyone stop it? An attack forced its crew to abandon ship in early March. No country has intervened, despite fears of environmental disaster, by Elizabeta Povoledo. For weeks, a huge, unmanned Russian fuel tanker has been drifting aimlessly in the Mediterranean Sea after its crew abandoned ship following a drone attack, according to the Russian government. The 900-foot ship has a gaping hole in its green hull, aerial footage shows, and in the words of a senior Italian official, Alfredo Mantovano, it is an environmental time bomb that threatens to cause serious damage throughout the surrounding area of the Mediterranean Sea. Yet amid growing outcry, no one is rushing to take responsibility for the ship's fate. Italian authorities said on Wednesday that the ship was approaching Libya, but warned that Italy could not monitor it closely because it was not in Italy's national waters. Libyan authorities warned on Wednesday that ships and oil platforms off the Libyan coast should look out for the listing ship, but announced no concrete response. Russia has blamed the attack on Ukraine and called on Mediterranean countries to deal with the fallout. Ukraine, which has sometimes attacked Russian tankers to harm Russia's war economy, has not commented on the ship. Malta has said it has a contingency plan, but stopped short of saying if or when it would be enacted. 9 European countries have written to the European Union calling on it to coordinate a plan to avert imminent and serious risk of a major ecological disaster in the heart of the Union's maritime space, according to a letter seen by the New York Times. None have commandeered the vessel. The tanker called the Arctic Medagaz has been adrift since the attack on March 3rd, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry. It was carrying at least 700 tons of fuel and some liquid natural gas, the ministry later added. The ship's name was changed last year, according to online ship records. Before the change, several Western countries, including the United States, had placed restrictions on the vessel because it was considered part of Russia's so-called shadow fleet, a group of aging tankers used by Russia to circumvent Western sanctions. The ship left Egypt in late January, according to Vessel Finder, a maritime tracking service, and was attacked southeast of Malta, according to the Russian Foreign Ministry. Italy's Civil Protection Department said on Wednesday that the vessel had drifted south in recent days toward Libya. Major storms this week in the Mediterranean prevented the Italian authorities from monitoring the vessel more closely, said Pier Francesco Demolito, a spokesman for the department. Mr. Demolito said that it did not appear that the tanker had lost any of the heavy fuel it used for its own propulsion. Italy and Malta briefed senior European officials on Monday about the escalating maritime and environmental threat in the Mediterranean posed by the carrier, according to the European Union. In a statement, the Italian branch of the World Wildlife Fund, an environmental campaign group, said that a potential spill of the liquid natural gas could cause fires, cryogenic clouds that are lethal to marine life, and widespread long-lasting pollution of the water and the atmosphere. Next, Miami Cubans fear Trump won't go far enough. The Castros have to go. Many Cubans in Florida have sought regime change for decades. They fear that President Trump's talks with Cuba will not lead to wholesale political transformation. By Patricia Mazzei. The musician Willie Chirino was singing a protest song at a gala hosted by Cuban American lawyers in Miami last month when the event's special guest joined him on stage. Mike Hammer, the head of the U.S. Embassy in Havana, shimmied as Mr. Chirino held the microphone to his lips so he could chant the chorus with the raucous crowd. Que se vayan ya, they sang. They should leave now. In this town, everyone knew that the they referred to the communist leaders of the Cuban government. The scene captured the hope and exuberance that Cuban Americans in South Florida have felt since the Trump administration began a pressure campaign and secret talks to force change in Cuba, 67 years after the communist revolution that spurred an exodus to Miami and reshaped the city. 2 weeks later, that excitement has been tempered by the realities of geopolitics and diplomacy. Conservative Cuban exiles who have sought political change on the island for decades fear that wholesale transformation is not in the cards for now. Their disappointment, even before any deal has been announced, is evidence of the complications that seem inescapable for the Trump administration's Cuba negotiation team, led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the most prominent Miami Republican in the country. The New York Times reported on Monday that the Trump administration wants to push President Miguel Diaz-Canel of Cuba from power, but the Times also reported that the administration is not seeking to dilute the power still wielded by relatives of Fidel Castro, the leader of the 1959 revolution who died in 2016. One of them, Raul Guillermo Rodriguez Castro, a grandnephew of Mr. Castro, has been one of Cuba's main negotiators with the United States. But what might constitute a win for President Trump in Cuba might not go far enough for some of his most ardent Cuban American supporters, some of whom have devoted their lives to the cause of a free Cuba. The island country has dominated Miami politics for almost 7 decades. That tension has put some Republican politicians in South Florida in an uncomfortable position. While broadly supporting the president's push, they have also already started chiding him over the specific details. The Castros have to go, said Mayor Brian Calvo of Hialeah, Florida, a heavily Republican city outside Miami that is home to the highest proportion of Cuban immigrants in the country. Diaz-Canel has to go. You need a free and fair election. You need a democratic transition. That's the only way that you know we're going to have a lasting change. Many Cuban Americans have unresolved, decades-old disputes over properties seized by the communist government. Some want their land back, and many have demanded the release of political prisoners and the restoration of civil rights in Cuba. Castro family members remain Cuba's top decision makers, and many exiles consider anything short of their removal insufficient. Some hardliners in South Florida have called not only for them to be forced from the island, but also for their arrest and prosecution akin to the Nuremberg trials. For now, the only change the Cuban government has announced in the face of a collapsing economy is a plan to allow foreign investment from Cubans abroad, including the United States. Mr. Rubio told reporters in the Oval Office on Tuesday that Cuba's leaders are unable to fix the economy and that the island needs new people in charge. In a statement, the State Department noted that Cuban Americans have overwhelmingly backed Mr. Trump. Concerns among Miami Republicans about the negotiations began to surface last week after a USA Today report suggested that Mr. Trump might be eyeing an economic but not political deal with Cuba. That sounded similar to the approach he took with Venezuela in January when the U.S. military captured the country's leader, Nicolas Maduro, but left one of his closest allies, Delcy Rodriguez, in power. That arrangement, along with Mr. Trump's focus on obtaining Venezuelan oil rather than on restoring democracy or supporting Maria Corina Machado, the Venezuelan opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner, has not sat well with many in South Florida. The region is home to the biggest Venezuelan community in the United States. The Cuban diaspora is looking for, first off, political reform. Representative Carlos A. Gimenez, the only member of Congress who was born in Cuba, said in an interview this week. He later said that any approach to change on the island that did not include the Castros' ouster would be insane. If the Castros are perpetuated in power, Representative Maria Elvira Salazar, who is Cuban American, told the Spanish-language television network Telemundo, "Then don't count on me." Miami's 3 Republican House members, including Representative Mario Diaz-Balart, have succeeded in pressuring the White House on Latin America policy before. Last year, they opposed certain talks involving Venezuela as Mr. Trump was rallying support for a sweeping domestic policy bill. Mr. Trump put the talks on hold to reduce the risk of the bill's defeat. Ramon Saul Sanchez, a prominent Cuban exile in Miami, has called on Mr. Rubio to meet with activists like himself who fear stabilizing a dictatorship. The regime is at the end of its rope, and now they're going to throw them a lifesaver to stabilize the economy? Mr. Sanchez said, "That's unacceptable, especially in light of what the Cuban people are doing, slowly taking to the streets." No one understands South Florida's political dynamics better than Mr. Rubio, the son of Cuban immigrants, who was a policy hawk on Latin America and a U.S. Senator. With Mr. Rubio leading the Cuba talks, skeptical hardliners are giving the Trump administration more benefit of the doubt than they afforded former President Barack Obama when he announced a surprise rapprochement with Cuba beginning in 2014. At the time, no Cuban Americans representing the hardline point of view were in on the negotiations, said Joe Garcia, a former Democratic congressman from Miami. As a reminder, you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The time is about 48 minutes past the hour. And now from the arts section, the American comedian who became a funny man in China. Jesse Appel left everything behind to pursue a comedy career in China, where Western-style club comedy was just finding its footing. By Sopan Deb. Becoming a successful comedian in the United States typically means grinding through open mic nights, taking expensive improv classes, and creating content for TikTok to build an online following. Jesse Appel skipped all that. When he arrived in China in 2012, he was a recent Brandeis graduate who didn't speak the language. By the time he moved back to the United States a decade later, he had become a fixture of China's burgeoning stand-up comedy scene. He now has more than 1 million followers on Douyin, China's domestic version of TikTok, by bridging the gap between American-style stand-up and more traditional forms of Chinese performance. He turned his fascination with Chinese culture into a decade-long comedy career there, a story he tells in a new memoir, This Was Funnier in China, an American comedian's cross-cultural journey. China was hardly a comedy vacuum. The country had long been obsessed with the slapstick hits of stars like Stephen Chow and with the rapid-fire banter of Zhan Sheng, a form of comedy that loosely translates to crosstalk. But the gritty, observational world of Western-style stand-up was only just scratching in urban clubs. Asked why he went, Appel, 35, said in an interview that he was intrigued by the challenge. While Chinese social media and art have long been hotbeds of coded satire and wordplay, the raw, direct nature of the stand-up mic offers something different. You go to a comedy show in China and people need it, he said. This is not a place where you have 100 methods of self-expression. Appel, a native of Newtown, Massachusetts, was drawn to comedy as a teenager, taking part in improv groups in high school. He first went to Beijing to study abroad when he was a junior at Brandai, majoring in East Asian studies. To prepare, he followed an intensive Mandarin program, learning and memorizing 100 new characters every day. He also had to sign a language pledge saying he wouldn't speak any English for 6 months, except to his parents. While there, he met other international students and even took part in some bilingual improv groups. The seed was planted. He wanted to live and work in China. After graduating, Appel earned a Fulbright scholarship to research Chinese comedy. When I got there, I realized I can do the things I like in the second country, he said. I don't need to change the whole of who I am or what I like just because I was put into a new area. I love improv. I love comedy. I loved comedic writing. Hey, they laugh over there too. He found support through Ding Guangquan, a famed performer of Xiansheng. The style, popular since the 1850s, is believed to have originated during the Qing dynasty of the 1600s. It features two people performing a combination of scripted and improvised sketches on stage. Western stand-up comedy was not mainstream in China when Appel arrived there. His research would assist of apprenticing with Master Ding. This was an extraordinary challenge for someone whose Mandarin wasn't quite fluent. Xiansheng audiences have very refined taste, Appel said. The funny thing about Xiansheng is at first it seems really easy because you just have to memorize your lines and go up on stage and do it, said Nick Angiers, a friend of Appel's and a fellow disciple of Master Ding. And it's only when you get to the intermediate part, when language isn't really a problem anymore, that you realize just how layered it is. Xiansheng gave Appel a baseline for developing his Chinese comedic voice. Just as stand-up was becoming more popular in the country, Appel said he performed live shows around 300 times a year and gradually built credibility in the Chinese comedy scene because there was a demand and few comedians to meet it. In China, once I had 20 to 30 minutes of Chinese stand-up, I was working on cruise ships. I was working on television shows. I was everywhere because, forget me being a white person, there just wasn't anyone who had 45 minutes of stand-up, he said. An early joke of Appel's was that became widely shared on social media involved Appel talking about his Boston roots. In Mandarin, he delivered a send-up of the Boston accent. I park my car in Harvard Yard. He did so, he said, to more clearly define himself to a Chinese audience. I kind of needed to shift their mentality away from, I'm a foreigner, to I'm an American from Boston, Appel said. Hey, you just like you guys have all your local things and you have your own local accents, we have that too. With the spread of social media and as students and others returned to China from abroad, the Chinese comedy landscape was changing just as Appel was beginning his journey. At first, audiences were confused by Western-style stand-up. People had a good time, but they didn't really figure out the point of doing this, said Tony Chow, a Beijing-based comic who has performed with Appel. Appel said he was part of the first ticketed stand-up show at a theater in Zhengzhou, a city of about 12 million in central China. In exploring the Chinese audience's comedic sensibilities, he found topical common ground with American audiences. Dan Chen, an assistant professor of political science at the University of Richmond, who has studied Chinese comedy, said that generational tension and workplace pressure were popular topics in Chinese stand-up. She also said that there had been a generational shift in the last decade in the type of comedy popular with younger Chinese consumers. There is this need for really authentic, direct personal expression in public discourse, and a lot of stand-up comedians in China, they talk about issues that bother them, Chen said. As his statue grew, Appel served as a resource for other comedians looking to perform, such as Tom Jia, a Chinese-born comedian who grew up in the United States, but moved back in 2014. Appel even started a comedy club in Beijing. The more I talked to Jesse, the more insecure I felt as a Chinese American, Jia said. It was constantly making me reassess how Chinese I was. And when he started serving me tea in his apartment, that really was the final blow. Appel had to navigate Chinese censors to perform comedy in China. Comedians have to submit their routines for government review. In 2023, a Chinese comedy studio was fined $2 million because Li Hoshai, a comedian there, mocked the military in a routine. Appel said that there were two types of censorship, the audiences and the governments. For example, he said Chinese audiences, unlike American audiences, prefer that comedians not name specific politicians in their routines, regardless of whether the censors allow it. In January 2020, after performing on the Chinese version of Last Comic Standing, Appel flew back to the United States for what he thought would be a 9-day vacation. Instead, COVID hit, his Chinese visa was canceled, his comedy club was closed down. During the pandemic, Appel's following in China exploded. Stuck at home, people had more time to watch videos, and that meant more exposure to Appel's stand-up and a sketch show he wrote and performed in. But the life he had spent years building in China was gone within days. Instead, he chose to reinvent himself and move to Los Angeles. He's still a comedian, performing often for Chinese American audiences, but he has also started a Chinese tea business that has taken off faster than he expected. He spends 4 months of the year in China, still performing, but also to source tea for his business. Now I have bits I do in Chinese back in America about how my job now is figuring out how to make white people laugh because they buy the tickets, Appel said, adding, I have to play the white audience like a minority comedian would. Weirdly. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the March 19th, 2026 issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Ken Kuminski. Thank you for listening.